Now then, you're very welcome along to this week's RTÉ Rugby podcast on the 1st of May. Doesn't really feel like summer just yet, but we're absolutely heading down towards the business end of the season. The BKT United Rugby Championship playoff spots are beginning to take shape. The Investec Champions Cup semi-finals this weekend, AIL finals last weekend, promotion and relegation playoffs done up and down the divisions, and the Women's Six Nations also came to a close in brilliant fashion for Ireland. Alison Miller will join me a little bit later on to talk through all of that. But before that, Bernard Jackman and Mick Kearney are with me to run through the four provinces. And guys, we'll start with Leinster because they're the only team up this weekend, taking on the Northampton Saints in the Champions Cup semi-final, Saturday, 5:30 at Croke Park. Looks like it's going to be a full house. Tickets sold out within a few hours a couple of weeks ago. Before we get into this weekend's game, though, Bernard, to touch on last weekend where they were beaten heavily again in South Africa. Two poor defeats in South Africa, and obviously a lot of that is tempered by the fact that they were keeping all of their frontliners back in Dublin to get ready for this game against the Northampton Saints, though. When you look back at it, though, like, have they been a little bit too cautious over the last couple of weeks with some of those selections?
No, I don't think so. I think that they probably thought they had a squad that could maybe get something out of the Lions game, and that was certainly a stronger squad. Obviously, Rob McBride and Jacques Nienaber were down there for that first week, and then they flew home to start prepping for Northampton. I think Leo will be disappointed in that. Like, if you look at over the last 3 seasons, or 2 seasons anyway, South Africa has been where they've blooded a lot of young players, and probably disappointed that some of them haven't stepped up to be a little bit more competitive. I mean, particularly the first halves against the Lions and the Bulls last year and the Stormers, they were blown away, and then they kind of settled into the game a little bit, but the games were kind of already gone away from them. So that will be frustrating to them. Definitely to come back with 0 points would be disappointing, but they have to manage this end of season, and it's a different end of season issue, or different end of season schedule than last year, where obviously they took a bit of a gamble in that semi-final against Munster and rested some key players for a Champions Cup final the week after. The nature of this season is the Champions Cup final is finished actually before the last round of the URC. So Leinster probably are I'd say very likely going to be in the top 2 in the URC. They may even get back to top spot because they won't have to rotate as much anymore. And it looks like they've given themselves the best possible chance of being ready to play Northampton and beat them. And then obviously they've got some rest into those international players, so they have to be very mindful of their load over the course of the season as a whole. And I think they can go very strong for every game to come, which for the other teams, that's a daunting prospect.
Yeah, and Mick, I mean, if Leinster win a Champions Cup this season, I think the argument will have been made that the team selections worked out fine. From a playing point of view, though, is it a difficult one for coaches to juggle, where sometimes when you do things like that and you have a very, very clear line between what is the A and the B team, can that be a difficult one for players to manage and for coaches to deal with? I suppose players just kind of accepting the fact that they are the second string and, trying to create that competition while also trying to keep a bit of squad harmony.
No, look, 100%. In saying that, I think with the CVC coming in and squad sizes being reduced, there's less. This is just from the outside looking in, less players in that kind of middle space. Even looking at the squads that went out to South Africa, no disrespect to the guys that played in the Stormers game, obviously there was some quality players there, but in the same breath, I think there's a big chunk of those players that maybe know that they wouldn't be involved in weeks like this. They wouldn't be involved in, the knockout stages of the Champions Cup. Now, there are a couple of outliers in that. There's your Max Deegans and your Scott Pennies and these kind of guys who they would obviously have being involved on these weeks. But then on the flip side of that, there's a group of guys who are just delighted to get on the pitch and get some minutes under their belts, with the fact that they're there isn't those opportunities anymore during Six Nations windows and November windows.
Looking ahead then to this weekend, Bernard, and the flip side of Leinster's selections is that Northampton have been either fully at it or close to fully at it in the Premiership in the last couple of weeks against the Leicester Tigers and then Harlequins as well. Like Robin McBride was asked about it during the week, and what is the right balance between being well rested and battle hardened? And while those Northampton players will have been hard at it in the last couple of weeks, I'm sure they're looking at it as we have had two really, really big games building up to this. And like I remember years back when the way the schedule used to be, particularly before that, the old Heineken Cup quarterfinals, where you would have traditionally had Munster and Leinster on the weekend before that, kind of in between the Six Nations and leading into the to the Champions Cup quarterfinals, and that was always viewed as like the big opportunity to give that first team one big blowout ahead of a big knockout game.
Yeah, look, there's arguments for both, but I think if you're Leinster, there's only so many times you can go to the well emotionally, and so many of those players have had to go to the well in the Six Nations for 5 games, the Rugby World Cup, whereas Northampton have had far less, international, so they can mix it up a little bit more. I think if you're looking at it, and you're Phil Dobson, who are their DOR, or Sam Bessie, their attack coach, and your Leo Cullen and Andrew Goodman, you take the 2 weeks with no game, to be able to basically freshen up, get the right quality work in, get the headspace of the weekend, and then peak for Northampton. So there's no doubt that the way it's fallen for Leinster, you prefer to be in that situation than Northampton having to play Harlequins and Leicester. And in fairness, they made a couple of changes for Harlequins. They're trying to mind their squad the best they can, but definitely the advantage is Leinster. Obviously, if Leinster had to travel to South Africa, that would have been a big blow, a big boost to Northampton having not to travel. But I think it's fallen nicely for Leinster, and it makes Northampton's task even harder.
Yeah, and speaking of that task then, and the whole Croke Park stuff, Mick, like it's going to be a fantastic experience all around. I think regardless of the result, we're all looking forward to just seeing a big game of rugby at a full house in Croke Park all over again. Like Leinster only had one game there back in the previous Aviva Stadium closure. Obviously, that was that Munster and Leinster game, which we might ask Birch about in a couple of minutes' time. But it always looked like a special occasion there. The Northampton Saints players and coaches were speaking over the last couple of days, and in fairness to them, they've spoken quite well about it. How they've learned about why Croke Park is such a special place in Irish sports. They've had a presentation from, I think it's one of their S&C coaches or a physio who is Irish, and was able to tell them all about the history of the place. They're certainly coming over here, the Northampton players, with eyes wide open about why this is such a big occasion to have a big rugby game at Croker.
Absolutely. Just firstly, it's an unbelievable occasion. As you mentioned there hasn't been a club game in Croke Park for 15 years. And, for the Leinster guys going into it, I'd imagine, I know from having spoken to them that they know that this really is a once in a lifetime opportunity to play in an 82,000 seater stadium, playing, for one, and then also to be able to do it at home in front of friends and family. It's going to be it's just going to be very special for them. And then, from a Northampton point of view, with the age profile of their backline in particular, they'll be coming across with absolutely no fear. They can talk about the history of Croke Park to the Irish people and all that kind of stuff. But they played in Twickenham last week in front of what's going to be a similar attendance. And they're so exciting. They play that very loose style of rugby, I suppose, in terms of their phase play. And I'd imagine they're coming across with absolutely no fear whatsoever, regardless of the history.
Yeah, and Bern, before we do go down our little stroll down memory lane, that is a good point on Northampton, that we've seen it now throughout the course of the season where they have the back line to really, really punish teams. And you would think that, like Croke Park, a good, firm, fast track, whatever about the occasion and 80,000 people there, the playing conditions look well set for Northampton to, at the very least, throw some punches at Leinster. I know Leinster are going to be big favourites, but Northampton absolutely have it in them to land some blows.
Yeah, I like Northampton's profile a lot. I think, in a bit of adversity, in the group stages in Thomond Park with a man sent off, they managed that game really well. A little bit like Cork against Terenure. They just stopped trying to play the rugby that they normally play, and relied on their defence, their set piece, and got a great win. And then obviously we saw at home against Munster, and we see it weekly in the Premiership. Their attacking prowess, their ability to bring power off the bench and pace off the bench and finish games strong. Chris Boyd, the former Wellington Hurricanes coach, spent a lot of time there building the skill set to be able to play this attacking game, and it's really starting to find its straps. I agree with Mick. Like they're not the number of people watching them won't be the issue. But like Twickenham for a Harlequins game, there's a lot of people there just there to be there. You know what I mean? They sell tickets cheap. It's not partisan. Like I would expect Croke Park to be really partisan this weekend, and I think the quality of opposition, if Leinster pitched to the same level they pitched against La Rochelle, theoretically, and you would expect it to be a step up for what Northampton have shown so far. Now, I think Northampton over the next couple of years could become a proper European contenders again. Obviously, they got to replace like Courtney Laws and a couple of other players who are moving on, but they've, with the departure of Wasps and London Irish and Worcester, there is ready-made talent there in other squads that they can potentially recruit. And obviously 2 English teams in the last 4 is a big improvement around where they were. But from a Northampton point of view, yeah, they can fire shots, but have they come up against the defence this year as aggressive and as combative as Leinster's? I don't think they have, and it's going to be fascinating to see if they can find weaknesses in it, because Leinster shut down La Rochelle, who are a good attacking side, very well.
But then the flip side of that defence being so aggressive, Bernard, is obviously like if they do manage to find a couple of little weak areas in it, they can be exposed very, very badly. That's obviously it's the risk and reward of having such an aggressive defence.
Yeah, and that's what they're going to be talking about all week. You know what I mean? That we don't have to beat them every time. We just need to break them once or twice, and opportunity will, or a doubt will start to float. Like they're going to have to try and find things to make them believe they can win. And certainly, they'll look back to even the Ulster game where there's kick space early on, little opportunities that other teams took or could have taken, and they'll say, we have the skill set, we have the game, we have the pace to break this defence. But again, I think the fact that Leinster have had 2 weeks, Gary Ringrose potentially back, just to fine tune. Nina Barr is incredible detail around what the opposition do. Even back when he was in Munster, there was flip charts everywhere of every play they've ever launched. So they're going to have to come up with something that Leinster haven't seen before. Have they got the IP to do that yet? But have they got a skill set to do that? Yeah, but I would say it's going to be very difficult for them to overcome Leinster this week. I think Leinster have the bit between their teeth now, and La Rochelle was a big step for them psychologically. To beat them twice was a big step, but now they need to finish it, and I'd be very disappointed if they lost this weekend.
Tell us then about playing at Croke Park, because you obviously you played in that Leinster Munster game in 2009 as well, and you also played for Ireland. Croker. For a young lad from Carlow, did you ever think you were going to be playing at Croke Park, let alone playing rugby at Croker?
Oh, I wish I was hoping as a kid to play Gaelic football there, and I would have been brought to matches. So I'm on the Wicklow Carlow border. So Baltinglass won a club championship, which was a huge achievement. And I was there on St. Patrick's Day with my family as a kid. I was there lots of times. I had a friend playing for Meath when they were on a run, so I went to loads of Leinster Championship finals. There's the three Dublin Meath games in a row. I was at, so I was there loads. I didn't think. I spent the first part of my career first 7 years playing the Challenge Cup with Connacht and Sale Sharks. So when I was playing Challenge Cup, I was always envious of the Munster, Leinster, Ulster big games in Europe where they're playing the best. And that was my goal, was to try and get to play Champions Cup. And then obviously got to Leinster. I broken leg for Black Sunday when Munster hammered us in the in the Lansdowne Road in 2006. And, that was a dark day for us. It was a second year under Cheika. The first year under Cheika. And then we got a chance in 2009, obviously, to go back. But I remember driving on the bus to Croke Park. I was 25th man for the first two Ireland games there in 2007 when we lost to France, the first up, and then we played England a couple of weeks later. And the pressure that was on the team to deliver against England, I've never seen anything like it. Because obviously we'd lost the first game in Croke Park, and then got to play there in 2008 for Ireland, and then to get to play there for Leinster against Munster in what still I think is one of the best occasions in Irish provincial rugby history, was phenomenal. And like Mick alludes to this, like this is a once in a generation opportunity. Like Cian Healy is the only player, from what I remember, in that current squad who would have played there in 2009. You know what I mean? And obviously once the RDS is redeveloped and the Viva doesn't have soccer matches, it may be a long time, before they get to play there again. So this is something that they will be very conscious of. They will, every second week when they're going to Dublin Airport, the Leinster players drive by Croke Park, and you know what I mean. And players aren't as cynical as you would think. Like, big stadiums, historic stadiums, do impact them. And even I was talking to Rog last year, and they lost the top 14 in Camp Nou, the Barcelona ground, which to get to play there as a rugby player, to get to play in Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, like I'm looking forward to going over there. Hopefully, if Leinster go through with RT, just to see it. You know what I mean? And players are like that. They do get excited by it. So, we've one of the best stadiums in the world on the north side, and it's incredibly rare for rugby players to get to play there, and they will be excited by that. And they'll be tapping into that. And Leo was part of that. He understands how important it is. And I think you're going to get a reaction. I think you're going to get a big reaction from this.
Mick, did you go to any of those Croker games when you were younger?
I did.
The rugby ones in Croke Park, obviously.
Yeah, I did. I was actually I was a ball boy for the France and the England game.
Right.
Yeah, to be honest, we were potentially partly to blame for the France loss. So basically the protocol, if you were a ball boy at the time, was if a penalty was kicked and you got it behind the post, there'd be another ball boy on the halfway line who'd kick it out, obviously, to the middle of the pitch, and then they'd have to take the restart from there. We were under strict instructions to never give it to a player behind the post. Obviously, the ball was kicked. A friend of mine caught the ball, and I think it might have been Vincent Clerc or one of the back three players was straight over to him. Give me the ball, give me the ball, give me the ball. He inevitably threw him the ball. France ran up and took a quick kick off, covered it, and then scored a try to win. So safe to say that poor lad was given his P45 immediately after. Never seen him inside Croke Park again, I'd say.
Eddie O'Sullivan has a picture of him on his wall with a dartboard. Yeah.
if you want to take 20 minutes after this podcast and just let me know if you want me to edit out this story or not, if you want to protect anyone's identity here.
Yeah, I'll definitely their code after the podcast.
So what was it like then being a kid right down at pitch level for all that? That must have been something else.
It was phenomenal. Like it was a wave of noise, particularly the England game. It was hair standing on the back of my neck for the entirety of the game. It was just even the national anthems, like they'll stay with me forever. It was a magic experience, and I've no problem saying it here. Like I don't think anything drove my desire more to be a professional rugby player than being involved in those couple of games, albeit as a ball boy.
Wow, yeah, that's interesting. Now, like I'll be there on Saturday. I'll be keeping an eye out on those ball kids down there to see what their conduct is like throughout the match as well. But listen, we'll have to keep things moving. That's Leinster and Northampton Saints, 5:30 this Friday evening, live on RT2 and RT Player. We do have to get through the other provinces as well, though. And we'll go to Munster next, Birch, because another win, another bonus point win down in South Africa. And I think it's just the easiest way to sum it up. The last 2 weeks have gone about as well as they possibly could for Munster.
Yeah, look, they're obviously a great touring side. And as we saw last year in the knockout stages, having to go away from home, quarterfinal, semi-final, final, has had no negative effect on them. In fact, they throve in it. And I think this has been a big tour for them, 10 points. Some of the older senior players been banging form. Zebo had a great 2 weeks, and I know there's lots to talk about his contract, and I think the initial plan was they weren't going to contract him, but he's certainly putting his hand up for some kind of a deal. Pete obviously got his contract sorted out. Connor was excellent. Archer was excellent. Jack Crowley, he continues to show why he's the man to replace Sexton, and obviously be a long-term option for Munster. So they'll come back in a really good place, and they may fancy the chance to sneak into the top 2 now. They've got a fairly okay draw over the last 3 rounds, and it's their trophy. They've no distractions of Europe. So yeah, a really good place.
Yeah, 2 home games, 2 home interpros against Connacht and Ulster, either side of an away game against Edinburgh. It's not an easy run-in, but other teams have harder run-ins, I think is probably the way to describe it. But Mick, the Lions win on Saturday in particular, it looked like it was an important one because I think it showed that Munster can win in a pretty boring fashion. I say this as a massive compliment, that particularly in the first 40 minutes when they built up that, I think was it 16-6 lead or thereabouts at halftime, they hadn't really done anything remarkable in the first half. They had just done all the basics very, very well. They'd kicked really well. They had chased really, really well. They'd gone after the breakdown excellently. They had taken some points off the tee early on to give themselves a bit of a buffer, and then just built off it. I think when they've played well this season, a lot of the time it's because of the really exciting backline shape that we've seen, or some excellent attacking play. But this was just doing the basics really, really well, and comfortably winning an arm wrestle.
No, for sure. And I think that's going to give them a huge amount of confidence going into the next couple of weeks as well. Their set piece was excellent in the first half of that game. Now look, the Simon Zebo try, the penalty try, even you could say that was somewhat fortuitous. It was a loose ball, loose offload by Snyman, then another loose enough offload from Crowley. If the Lions had fly hacked that through, they've so much gas. I can't say that they would have won the foot race, but they definitely would have been close to it. And that was a pivotal moment in the game, in my opinion. And Munster came out the right side of it. And as I said, I think it's just going to give them massive confidence coming into the next couple of weeks. They'll be going into the final end of the URC season with lads coming off the back of a week off, well rested. Hopefully, they can get John Ryan back fit, so they have that little bit more depth at tight head, even though, as Birch mentioned, Stephen Archer has been playing exceptional rugby.
Yeah, a word on Stephen Archer as well, actually, Birch, then, because the two of you have mentioned him now, and the man seems to love South Africa. He went over there last year, it was this time last year when what started that big run they had with the win and the draw against the Stormers and the Sharks. Played 80 minutes in each of those. Goes back down there this year. There's plenty of pressure on him because John Ryan's suspended and Ollie Yeager is just coming back from the knee injury. And he puts in 2 starts. And I thought in particular against the Lions, controlled the scrum, looked absolutely on top of the Lions. And the man still got it.
He's got old man strength, old man fitness, hasn't he? But to go 80 is, which he's done over the last while, and when he's needed to, because they've obviously had suspension to John Ryan, injury to Ollie Yeager, and whenever he's needed to step up, he's done that. Obviously, over the last couple of years, there's been a transformation in his skill set, and he needed to, because the way Prendergast wants him to play. In fairness to him, his set piece stuff has always been very tidy, but I think that's the evolution that he'd be really proud of. And look at his record for Munster. I mean, to do what he's done is phenomenal, and it's great to see. There's lots more rugby left in him, and now actually, they've a pretty strong a tight head prop. And okay, the age profile of John and Stephen isn't ideal, but like Stephen showing what he can do. You can do that into your 30s, no problem. And like the scrum looked really, really strong as well, which will be important for them as they go into knockout rugby.
Looking towards the summer, then, I'm curious to see what you think, Birch. Would the fact that Munster in these last 2 years have had such a strong record down in South Africa, do you think that's going to play into Andy Farrell's selection thoughts, even talking wider squad stuff, going down to South Africa in the summer? Like, I mean, is there evidence there to suggest now that Munster probably do deserve a couple of extra players on the plane to South Africa, given what they've done down there in the last couple of years?
Look at every big win they have like that, or block of wins like that, puts their case forward. But I think the problem is, I think Farrell will put more weight on, the semi-final, final in the URC, semi-final, final of the Champions Cup. That's where Munster will be like those players need to get back to that level, even quarterfinal, to be really shown that, because that's the nearest thing to international level. But I do think some of the likes of Tom Ahern, if you remember, he got injured at a bad time, just before Six Nations. Hodnett's been exceptional. What is Farrell? I'm fascinated to see what Farrell wants to do with that squad. I think it seems as if he wants to go very strong. But is there any idea? Is there any thoughts around resting a couple of the players who've been big for us and probably will be big for us next year and the Lions tour? If he does, the next in line are the Munster players, because to be fair to Ulster, they've got a few wins recently, but there's not a lot of people in the Ulster team putting their hand up to be starting for Ireland, and likewise in Connacht, to be fair. So this could be a great tour for Munster to start getting more players in that match day 23.
Final point on Mick, on Munster then, Mick. Like we mentioned, the run in they have, where they've Connacht at home, Edinburgh away, Ulster at home to finish things off. They're third place at the moment. They're 5 off the top. They're 1 point further back from Leinster in second. But I think crucially as well is the fact that they're 8 points ahead of the Stormers in fifth. So like one win realistically should be enough to get them a home quarter final. The target surely now has to be pushing up into that top 2 and getting a home quarter and potentially home semi-final, because they've had to do it the hard way last year in the URC, and they ended up making themselves have to do it the hard way in the Champions Cup as well, and away from home last year and this year in the last 16 ultimately proved too much for them. Getting that home advantage has to be hugely, hugely important for them, financially as well, actually.
No, massively, and I'd say that was a target that they'd set at the start of the season. Get a home semi, hopefully get a home final for them. Play in front of their people. Like Thomond Park, it's a fortress, and maybe that it hasn't delivered on a couple of occasions over the last couple of years, but like the big days in Thomond will always be the big days in Thomond, and in my mind, for the players, whether they've said it to each other or not, that's going to be a huge, huge driver for them to be able to get those big days back there again.
Connacht then, Birch. They got their bonus point win against the Dragons on Saturday. That's brought them up to 6th in the table. It's still crazy tight down around that 5th to kind of 10th, 11th spot in the table. As I say, they got their bonus point win, their 2 bonus point wins in a row. It wasn't pretty, but ultimately they got the job done. They have this week off, and then they can go hell for leather at that final block of 3.
Yeah, I actually thought there was so much to like about their first half performance in attack. like real purpose, scored after a couple of minutes. Real aggressive in their carries, just physically basically smashing Dragons back. And then they just concede like a very soft try from a set piece for Steph Hughes, where there's just a massive dogleg between Bundy and JJ. And then you can see the try before half time from a line-out wall 15 meters out where they just don't cover the blind side. And, you know, they allowed the Dragons score 27 points, which meant in the last 5 minutes, Munster or Connacht are uncomfortable, you know, and probably the red card that Connacht probably benefited from that red card to Ben Carter in that they were able to go then and kind of regain some dominance. So there's a lot of flaws in it. And given how good they were against Zebra, even though Zebra were very poor, I really felt that the Dragons should have been a more comfortable win for them. But they got 10 points out of their last two games, like Munster. Unfortunately for them, their draw isn't as easy. You know, they've got to go to Munster. They receive the Stormers, I believe, and then they go to Leinster. You know, so that's the challenge. And looking at the fixtures of the teams around them, I think they might need 2 wins to stay in the top 8. So that's the challenge. And none of those are gimmies, you know, because the Stormers, because of the loss to Ospreys, they're chasing their tail a little bit now as well. So they don't really have much room to maneuver. They're bringing their best squad, apparently, all their internationals up to Europe for next trip, which is going to make it harder. And also Connacht obviously that issue around 10. Is Jack Carty going to be back? Because JJ looks like that was a serious injury.
Yeah.
So he's going to be out. But Mac Hansen and Cordero are very close to being back, so that'll give them a lift. I think Connacht, they're frustrating because there's so much potential. But at the moment, they're conceding such soft tries. Most weeks, go back, you know, Poe, Benetton twice, the Dragons, that's going to kill them. If they don't tighten up in that area, they're not going to be able to outscore Leinster, Munster, and Stormers like they did Zebra and Dragons.
Yeah, and like even on the top 8, I think Connacht fans and Ulster fans will be sweatily watching the Challenge Cup this weekend between the Sharks and Claremont, because you desperately want Claremont to win that game, and you do not want the Sharks taking up potentially the last of those Champions Cup spots. Otherwise, you're going to need to get top 7. Another bit of Connacht news this week. Mick, Tiernan O'Halloran announced his retirement. He's someone you would have played with many, many times, I'd imagine, during your own time at Connacht. Tell us what sort of a player was he? What sort of a fella was he?
Yeah, no, I played with Tiernan for a long time. He's a great guy. Like he's the ultimate team man. You know, very, very selfless in terms of how he goes about his business. He was always a great pro. You know, so would have looked after himself very well. And look, don't get me wrong, he definitely enjoyed himself off the pitch as well. And I can say that from experience because I was beside him. But and then look, as a player, he just a natural. He was a natural footballer. You always knew that if he was at the back, if a bomb went up or there was a counter-attacking opportunity, he was going to make the most of it. So he was very enjoyable to play with in that sense. And you know, I suppose the best compliment I can give him is he just gave so much confidence to the players around him. And he should be very, very proud of the career he had. As I'm sure he is, and I'm sure his family are the exact same as well.
Yeah, and Bart's like 236 games for the province. And I'd say, had it not been for a couple of bad injuries as well over the years, he could have been pushing up towards 260, 270.
Yeah, one club player, and I suppose one of the highlights of his career was that try against Leinster in Murrayfield, which I've seen a few times on social media. Yeah, as Mick said, he can have no regrets about his career. I think he left it all out there, and he'll be hoping that, you know, there's knockout rugby for him and Connacht this season, and that'll be his legacy will be helping Connacht get back to the European Champions Cup again next year, because over the last 5 or 6 years, you know, they've been pretty regular in that, and he's played a big role in that.
Moving on to Ulster then, 38-34 win against Benetton. Similar to Connacht, I suppose, in a way, Birch. Like, it wasn't perfect, but it was the bonus point win, and it did settle them down a bit. And I think the scoreline probably flatters Benetton a bit because they did score that try with the last play of the game when, Ulster knew they had the game in the bag at that stage. But considering the injuries Ulster had after that game against Cardiff and how poor that Cardiff performance was, it probably was an important performance for Ulster, particularly in attack, where they actually did score some lovely tries.
Yeah, no, I think Alison was excellent at 13. It's been hard for Richie because obviously he missed, the Dragons game because of Ireland. I think he missed the week after because he was finishing off his duties with Ireland, and then he's come in and there's trip to South Africa. He's trying to get to know the players. He's trying to implement a little bit of change. Then they're in obviously beat Montpellier, but then get knocked out of the Challenge Cup. So he hasn't had a huge amount of non-match weeks to actually really get him going. But I think you saw against Cardiff just starting to shape up. Look, at the big thing for there is to rebuild confidence. And Mick, a lot of the Ulster squad, but they did look really shy in confidence at the latter end of Dan's time, and even for probably the first month afterwards. But I think that win against Cardiff, even though it was probably pretty lucky, and Richie admitted that, but Benetton was much better, and hopefully they'll start to pick up some momentum now, because the Ulster fans, they're crying out for a team they can follow. They have everything. They have the stadium. They have the history. Obviously, they got to get a little bit of recruitment and retention sorted out. But Ulster should be a strong province, and just earlier on this year, it didn't look like they were tooled up to succeed.
Yeah, and like their next game, for example, Mick, I think is away to the Scarlets, and while it's away from home, that's a very, very winnable game. It's a Scarlets team that are pretty low on confidence, and if Ulster can get a couple of those injured players back and get a decent win there, all of a sudden there's a bit of confidence building. And I think obviously for them now, it's just nailing that Champions Cup spot, and whatever happens in the playoffs happens. But they just need to finish out these games on a high.
Absolutely. Look, as Birch alluded to, at the end of Dan's tenure, the guys were rock bottom from a confidence point of view. There was a huge amount of uncertainty up there in terms of who was coming, who was going. But winning gives you confidence. They've obviously won their last two games. As you mentioned, they're going across the Scarlets, extremely low on confidence. So I think if they can manage to get another win off the back of the two that they've already had, it'll give them a big boost going into the end of the season, because there's so much potential up there. So many quality players, and there's a decent group of lads moving on as well. So, having spoken to a couple of the lads up there, there's a big emphasis on sending those guys off in style. Even if not from a performance point of view, just from an overall effort point of view in terms of what they're going to put into it.
Yeah, 100%. And then also, like Birch mentioned, the Scarlets game, but the week after that, they're going to be playing Leinster at home, potentially the week before Leinster could have a Champions Cup final, and that could be a similar Leinster team to the one we saw last weekend, or the last 2 weekends in South Africa. All of a sudden, that's a very, very winnable game again. So they could potentially be in a situation where, as tough as this season has been at times, where they could be going to Munster for that final match of the season in a reasonably comfortable position.
No, absolutely. And look, I don't think Leinster will send as weak a team to Ravenhill as they did to the Stormers, but definitely it might not be full strength. Certainly anyone with any niggles will be looked after. So yeah, and that's the look of the draw sometimes, based on where you play certain teams, when you play them. But from Richie's point of view, I actually think it'd be great if Ulster sorted out the coach for next year, over this down week, and that Richie gets the chance to do it and put together his own staff and have a big say in the recruitment. I know Bryn Cunningham is going to look after the recruitment, but I hate the idea of someone who's not coaching basically give a coach a set of players that they put together. When there's involvement in that and when there's cooperation in that, I think you have a far better chance. So if Richie is going to be the coach next year, I think it'd be great for Ulster to tie that down and then let him get planning. And also, it probably gives the players certainty as well, because obviously if they're waiting for a new name who hasn't been announced yet, they're basically hanging on for something that may not happen. And I think the players deserve that. So it'd be really good from Ulster. I know there's an interim CEO and there's lots of things happening there, but realistically, I think Richie probably deserves a crack at it. Does deserve a crack at it, and hopefully they've seen enough now in the 4 or 5 weeks he's there to give him that chance.
Yeah, so that's the 4 provinces wrapped up. Before we do finish, just a quick word on the AIL finals at the weekend, particularly the Division 1A final at the Aviva on Sunday. Cork winning for the first time since 2019, 33-22 winners against Terenure. I'm not sure. I think Mick's gone. Lost Mick temporarily there, but we were talking about it off air, Bert, before we started. Thoroughly deserved winners, particularly given the numerical disadvantage they had for 3/4 of that game.
Yeah, incredible. And even when they were 15-15, I thought there was a real edge to them defensively. They looked to double team Terenure's big ball carriers. They were narrow defensively, and you could see Terenure trying to get to that edge, but just couldn't execute. A couple of times they got a bit of gain line, but then Con got him on the way back. And other times they spilled the ball because of the pressure. So it was a very good defensive performance. And then obviously their maul has been phenomenal all year. The scrum was strong, and they had a good goal kicker. And that piece of defense by Matt Bowen and Connor Phillips was one of the best pieces of defenses I've seen, at any level this season. And yeah, it's good to see Con back. Obviously Terenure had it last year. Terenure finished top of the league, but Con by the nature of how they played in the final, I think they probably deserve it.
Yeah, Mick, obviously you can hear there, we were just chatting about the AIL final on Sunday. You obviously can empathise with both sets of players. You know how the Con players are feeling after winning a title. You know how the Terenure players will be feeling this week having lost the final. It's a pretty drastic mix of emotions all around, isn't it, for those 2 sets of players?
Completely. Like I'd say the Con lads are still going now, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's when you do win it, it's unbelievable, because Terenure and Cork Con and plenty of clubs in the AIL, they're so enshrined in the community. Everyone in the community is involved. So when you come away with the win, you get the bus back to the club. Everyone is there. There's hundreds of people there. And to be able to share that moment with them is incredible. But then on the flip side of that, when you don't get the result you're after, it's just an unbelievably disappointing experience. And there's that feeling that you've let down an unbelievable amount of people.
Yeah, well, look, I can safely say I went back to Lakelands on Sunday evening after that. I can safely say with the amount of people that were still there when I left at about 12:30, 1 o'clock on Monday morning, I don't think anyone felt let down there. Anyway, that's fair to say. Listen, fellas, thanks a million for joining us on this section of the podcast. If Johnny Holland is there, we'll give him a shout out and say congrats, and we'll ask him to come on the pod again next week. I didn't extend the invite this week. I said I'd allow him a couple of days to celebrate, but Johnny will be on to you soon enough. Listen, fellas, thanks a million. We'll have Alison Miller up with us next, talking Women's Six Nations. Now I am delighted to welcome back Alison Miller. Ireland's Guinness Women's Six Nations campaign ended in celebration at the weekend. A 15-12 win against Scotland at Kingspan Stadium in Belfast. Enough to see Scott Beeman's side finish 3rd in the Six Nations, leapfrogging both Scotland and Italy, qualifies them for the World Cup nice and early ahead of next year, and also WXV1 rugby in the bag for later on in the autumn. Now, Alison, last week I tried to put you on the spot and to give us your verdict on Ireland's Six Nations campaign before the final match. It's a little bit easier to do that this week now that we have the full context of a 3rd place finish and a gritty win at the weekend.
Yeah, I think, look, it was not a great game to watch, we'll all be honest. It was a terrible game. I remember coming up to half time, I was like, I need a break from this. The 37 minutes, like, thank God I'm getting a break soon. But I think they won't care, because they've done what the last team failed to do in 2021, and they're up to WV, or I always say that wrong, WXV1. And look, that'll be difficult, but I think you can't turn down World Cup qualification. That's where you want to be with, especially the failure to get to the last one. So it was great that Wales did them a favour and they just had to win then. So it wasn't a pretty game, but to me, I was impressed with their mentality, because they're a team that's finding a way to win, and they found a way to win there on Saturday. And even their mentality to kind of just let the England game go and see it as a new preparation, which it was. That shows to me that they have a strong mentality. They can find a way to win, even if it's not pretty, even if they haven't played well. And good teams have that. So they've loads and loads of work to do to prepare now for the World Cup. But they're grinding out wins, and they're finding a way to win, which is really important.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a really important part of it, as well as the finding a way to win. Because if you look back at some of the other games, like take away the England and France games, but in the Italy game at the RDS, they were struggling to get into their rhythm in attack, and they couldn't figure out a way back into the game or an avenue back in. In the win against Wales down in Cork, that was the day where everything went right from start to finish. And they never really had to kind of worry about where the win was going to come from. Whereas on Saturday against Scotland, this game was somewhere in between those two, where they found themselves in the tricky situation that they'd been in against Italy, and they needed to navigate their way out of it, and they needed to figure out what their roadmap was of how they get through these 80 minutes. And ultimately they did it. And that's a very, very important step for an inexperienced team.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. And I think the other point is, sure, like they had to try and qualify, and they did it. So they met that pressure of trying to qualify, and they didn't give into that pressure. They went out and performed. Wasn't a great performance, but they found the win. So that's impressive too, that they go and do what they've been asked to do and succeed. Because I think when we look back at the last team that didn't qualify for the World Cup, I thought they were the best team in the qualifier, but then, gave into the pressure and didn't qualify. So loads of work to do, a lot of areas in the game to improve, but they're happy now. They've qualified. As I said, they'll look to improve, which they need to do, when we look at their performance and some aspects of the game.
Yeah, and staying on that kind of the composure side of things and kind of being able to grind it out. Someone the players have mentioned a good few times before the tournament and throughout it as well has been Sean Ryan. So that's the new, he's the high performance kind of culture leadership kind of coach that's been brought in over the last few months. And he's been name checked quite a few times by coaches and players as well in the media sessions that I've been at. And you can kind of see, the influence along the way there. First of all, from the Italy game into the Wales game, and the difference in performance and how they were able to pick themselves back up after it. But it was something we spoke about last week, was how they were reacting to the defeat against England, where it was 1 point shy of being a record defeat for an Irish team. And when I had been out there doing media stuff last week, I was actually taken aback a little bit with how comfortably they had reacted to it. They were just straight talking about Scotland. They didn't look dejected by it. It looked like, I suppose, going into that England game, they had kind of decided, look, whatever happens this weekend, it's all about Scotland, and it's about getting that win in Belfast. And you could see that their confidence hadn't been rocked by what had happened at Twickenham. They hadn't been shaken up by it, and they still knew that everything was in their own hands, and they just had to go and win that game, and went out and did it.
Yeah, and I had said if they leave their ego at home and be rational and logical about performing, and that's what they did. And sometimes you'll actually see in the Women's Six Nations, like any team will put everything into trying to be competitive with England, and then they'll have a poor game the next day. Yeah. So I don't know if it was as masterminded as that, coming out and losing by so much and then beating Scotland, where some teams but put in all the rest of the teams actually had better score lines, but Ireland finished ahead of them all. So was it a masterstroke? Who knows? But it worked anyway. And he shows good mentality. And I think like culture is so important in a team. And obviously this team has kind of struggled with that maybe over the last 2 or 3 years, and changes and people coming in and out and problems. So that was actually, that's needed, and it's good to see that that's working. And because like, it's funny even listening to some of the coverage with, some of the players from other countries doing commentary were surprised that Ireland finished third. And it's kind of like, Ireland have always been up there, always. And even on days we're capable of putting in performances against England and France. So we're back where they've always been, and now it's time to push on. So last year was a disaster, but we have to take, like, hopefully that was like an isolation thing, and that we're back pushing on, and that we're driving on, because it couldn't got any worse than last year. I mean, that was an anomaly in terms of, if we look at performances and players, and so it's great to see that it's great to see that they've achieved what they've said they're going to do. That's that to me, that's the big statement. We're aiming to do this. This is what we're going to do, and do it. Because I've heard teams before, we're going to cause a shock and we're going to do this, and then they effectively don't do it. So I talked last week about the evidence that they're getting from performance, and then using that evidence to go and perform. And so that's a big part of it. Like, I think you have to be showing that you're capable of doing something to gain confidence, and they are doing that. And they have very good players coming through. So that'll be a big part of that too, that they, they're putting in the work. They have players that are capable of doing things. They've done it in spells, in patches, against Wales nearly all the time, against Italy sometimes, against France in parts. So that they use the evidence to build. So I'm impressed with that.
One other thing that I'm sure probably has helped them as well, where this has been the first Six Nations or first women's campaign, I would say, kind of like tournament as such, where we have just been able to talk about the rugby for the full 6 weeks, and there haven't been big controversies coming out in the middle of it. And I'm not giving out about those controversies being reported in the past, because they came up and they had to be spoken about, and we had to ask the players about them, and the players were in a difficult position, and the atmosphere was always very, very tense out there. I have found when things were happening off the pitch over the last few years that had to be addressed. Whereas, the signs are there now that the IRV have got the act together and have put some proper shape on this women's program. And as a journalist, I found it really, really enjoyable over the last 6 weeks, being able to go out there and ask the players and coaches week on week just about the games they were playing, and about the players who were going to be involved, and even getting the good news story, like Cleana Maloney coming back clean, and how great was it to see her scoring ultimately the second Irish try at the weekend and things like that. I have to say, this has been an enjoyable Six Nations to cover, because we've been able to just focus on the rugby and see, are Ireland getting better or are Ireland getting worse? Ultimately, they're getting better.
Yeah, you make a valid point. Last year was a bit of a nightmare to really, do any media work or commentate on, because you were damned if you did comment in one way and you were damned if you commented another way. And like, the big thing for me, there was a lot of controversies, obviously, and sometimes you're like, oh God, why are we reporting on that? Like, certain ones, and then some needed to be 100% reported on. And it just all got very, like anything, when something becomes toxic and it becomes negative, it just goes off in a spiral, and no one can get out of that. Players, media, it just that's the direction it's going, and it's hard to stop. So, like, the RFU have made mistakes, and I think they've learned from them. I'm hopeful now, because even just seeing this year, the 3 girls that came from sevens, the type of players they were, that to me was like, they've grown up playing 15s. They know the game well. They've been playing since they're young. So we weren't just putting in maybe talented sevens players that hadn't grown up at 15s, which, putting you into position, which is a very different game. And so that to me was, intelligent. We're not taking girls that have very little experience in this game and putting them in. We're taking the girls that have played all the way underage, Eve Higgins, Avian Riley, Bevan Parsons. So that's like, well, that's just like smart, but also so simple that why was it not done before? Like, why? Anyway, I've gone on a tangent about that because I have before. And like, we got left behind, and the letter, I think it justifies that whole letter, I think, and it justifies the stands, even that people like Clean made, to get things right. And like, it was hard for players when they feel maybe they don't have everything they need to perform, because it becomes a distraction. And some players will perform regardless of what they have. Others maybe are and it's different to when we were playing. We just played. We're now like, and that's the right way. You should have what you should have, so it's great that we can now. There was a bit of like, we can't judge them on against other teams because they're not given everything. Where now there is, I know it's still a long way to go, because some of them are professional, some are in England and some are playing, but the opportunities are there to take a contract if it's there, and the IRFU are rowing in behind it. And it is good to see, because there was a lot of mistakes made for a long time, and not listening to players, but never going about to listen to ask even, so
yeah.
Mistakes were made, and that was always the biggest thing for me. I'd see things coming up, they're not going to learn again. Like, how they've done this again? They weren't, looking at past problems and going, let's not let this happen. They just kept happening. So it's great that we just talk about the rugby, like, just talk about the rugby, and there's no issues or controversies. And I'm sure the players are delighted, because that would take a big toll on their performance as well, having to deal with that all the time. But and what it's good now is, like, as a player, you're accountable for your performance, and
yes.
That's it. If you don't play well, it's not because of any other reason. So we can just focus on that, and the players know that they're not being bogged down in unnecessary things that have come up over the years, which was, no fault of their own. And so it's great to see that. It's great to hear that.
Yeah, and it's a small, compared to what England are doing. This is a small level of success that Ireland are having, but it's an early indication, and it's an early result to be able to say, look, we asked for X, Y, and Z. You've given us that, and now we can show you that the results are there. That that putting in the investment into the game does actually pay off. And if you do this again and again and again, results can, in theory, get better. Now, obviously, Wales are a good example that success and progress isn't just this straight line up towards the top. There are going to be some bumpy days ahead, and some of those bumpy days are probably going to come in WXV1. Like, Wales would have found themselves on the hard side of some tough results last autumn as well, and who knows, maybe there was a confidence dip coming into the Six Nations that they had to deal with. That is something now that Ireland have to work on this autumn. This is the cost of finishing in the top three, and the responsibility of finishing in the top three is that they're going to have to play against some seriously good teams in the summer, and they're going to have to be able to deal with those England games like last week a little bit better than they did in the Six Nations.
Yeah, we talked about this, like the England game last week. It was just like, there was points where it was just, I won't say tune out, but the focus was gone. And, we said it's about learning to stay in moments and try and grind out, really difficult moments. And say England's discipline had been poor up to the Ireland game, but it's if someone like England get a yellow or red card, use those minutes to try and, build a platform and develop, because it is going to be difficult. And I think, I always say this, I think we don't have a player pool. So I think we need to find players. We need to go look for them around clubs around Ireland. And there's a lot of talent out there. I don't know if there's much active searching going along, but I think you have to do that in Ireland. I think you can't just go, who's coming to us? Who's ready? You got to go find girls and fast track them. And I know there is those talent hubs, but I mean, I think some people need to get into their cars and drive around the country and start looking. I think like that is the most basic thing. I think that needs to be done, because we need to find players with a little bit of spark in them from somewhere and develop them and fast track them, because look, we have a huge advantage. We have far less players, so it's going to take. Imagine doing that in England. You couldn't. You can do it in Ireland. Like you have to find other ways. Like, so what are these ways to try and be competitive? Go and do it. Like, I mean, because I think you'll see in those small clubs around Ireland, especially the rural ones, you'll find girls with huge athletic ability, that might come from Gaelic football or athletics or camogie, and they're just playing rugby, would enjoy it. But I've seen that when I've gone off coaching places, and you're like, God, that person could make it. But they don't really realise they're good, or they have the potential. They don't have the rugby language or lingo, and get them and fast track them. But I don't think it's done. It's not done. So I think there needs to be a bit of that, and that's not for the Irish management. That's for someone else to try and find them. But we, as a country, we've got to think outside the box. We've got to be imaginative. We've got to find these people, because we've got far less players who can, like, if there's a few younger players that can come on now out of somewhere and just add some value, because there's a lot of good players there, but we need more competition in areas, and we need to build depth and strength across the whole squad.
Yeah, and then that leads me to the last point I was going to make, which was the AIL final on Sunday, UL Bows beating Railway Union, and that, I suppose, is going to be, in the future, that's going to be the avenue for blooding players in. Obviously, in your day, it was the elite competition, but I think with the way the Celtic Challenge is going, the role of the AIL is going to change a little bit. I don't know, did you see, literally only in the last hour, the IRFU announced that the next year's format for the Celtic Challenge is expanded further. So it's going to be 10 rounds of games, 5 matches home and away, starting from the middle of December leading up to the Six Nations. So immediately, like, that's removing, that's removing all the internationals pretty much from the AIL for several months of that season. And we can probably sit here and debate for hours about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but that ultimately it's the way it's going to go, is that the international players aren't going to be available as much, and the AIL is going to end up being more of a support league and a development league for players into the provincial, or into the Celtic Challenge format or international thing.
Yeah, I suppose
I'm not saying it's a good or a bad thing, but I'm saying it's going to become the avenue. It's going to become the avenue to test out these players.
Yeah, and they'll have to look at the quality of that to see, are the players getting quality game time from that. Obviously, the first year of it did not work at all, and was a bit better this year. But we did see players at the weekend playing the AL final that had been involved, like, that were squad members. Didn't obviously get capped and stuff. But I think it's an interesting one as well, because I feel like some of the players at this standard, they're playing for Ireland, they don't have much rugby, and I think it would benefit just to get a little bit of that bread and butter from club rugby, just to put a few things in practice and get confidence. So I don't know, I'm like, the AIL gets an awful rap, it does, and there could be terrible games, but then there could be great games. Like, I remember playing for Belvedere. We played against Railway Union. There's loads of their international players, loads of our internationals, and it was it's a really high standard that, you'd wonder, there was a lot of learnings to be gained from those kind of games, but they won't happen as much now, because that's not going to be. Maybe, I always think a little bit of common sense is needed sometimes, maybe to release players back in potentially, because I think as well, part of being a rugby player is you got to harden up too, and you got to get used to that, that contact. And I used to nearly find it when I was playing, it was easier the more you were playing. Obviously, rest was important, and I'm talking about in terms of keeping that edge to your game and keeping that abrasiveness and that kind of, I don't know, what would you call it, that battle-hardened mindset that you had by playing constantly, and obviously being well rested and getting all your conditioning work, and that's important. But there was times where I didn't play very much, probably playing like sevens, or maybe being injured or being minded a bit more. And I felt like I lost the edge to myself. And you see, like, players that would thrive off contact and thrive off breaking tackles and, dominating collisions. And if you're not getting that much, it can affect your game. So maybe a bit of common sense could, you know, be used. We put certain players in, they need game time, we need to get their confidence up, and, you know, because there is some good players in the IL, and I think people need to go out and watch those players as well, you know, and see, are those players up to it, because you know, this is what I hear, is that they're not being watched. Now, obviously, the thing is, everything is on video, or that sounds really old-fashioned, I sound like 90. You know, you can get all the games, and like,
it's all on the TikTok. It's all on the TikTok.
But I think what it does is, sometimes if you know someone's there watching, you know, I think it does a lot to the mindset of players and stuff. So I think that would be good to see. Don't quote me on that, but it's an interesting one, because I think they'll have to constantly learn whether it's going to have a good impact. We'll have the girls in England as well, and you know, how you manage those working girls, how they fit in, like, because I don't, like, if the team are squad or full time, and then you've Celtic Challenge games, and I don't know how serious that gets then. Does that get like midweek training? Does that evolve to that? You know, and then that problem then is the people that are working, can they actually perform in that, because they have to hold down jobs.
And the other question then is, like, depending on certain clubs and how many clubs are going to be providing players to the Wolfhounds or the Clovers, like, could some clubs get into a situation where they're struggling to field an AIL team because they're missing X number of players?
Well, this actually happened. I played for Old Belvedere this year. I hadn't played in 5 years, you know, because they were down numbers because of the Celtic Cup and this and that. And it was not something I wanted.
So the knock-on effect of the Celtic Challenge is you have to be brought out of retirement.
I said, I'll play, but I'm not playing the backs. I'm playing back row. I don't know. So that was an experience anyway. And we saw Ciara Griffin playing and a few more players. But and you don't want to see teams struggle. But like, the knock-on effect then is if that Celtic Cup becomes a little bit more professionalised, which I probably will, how do we keep those girls that work Monday to Friday going? Can they start taking time off work, or can we put them into club? But there's going to have to be a little bit more flexibility, maybe. I'm not sure. And we won't know whether this works or not till we see the evidence in a few years. But I just thought it was a pity to see the AIL final on the Sunday straight after that Scottish game. I thought, you know, and I've heard some other journalists say that too. So it's not just me maybe coming from a biased point of view, have been a past player and seen it like, it actually was a pity, because it was a big competition. Obviously, it worked well having it with the men, so you bring in more crowds and stuff. So there's benefits to that too, you know.
Yeah. Now the one to finish the final point I'll make on it, on the final and that double header. I was there on Sunday as part of the Terenure entourage that were landing out to watch the match afterwards. But like, one thing I did notice, I think it's a good idea to do the double header, and I think if they are to do it again next year, I think one small little thing to change that they could make is just put an extra 15 minutes or half an hour between those two games, because I found the turnaround between full-time whistle went in the women's game, the UL Bows players got to you know, celebrate around for 5 minutes or so while they were setting up the presentation area. Trophy presentation is made. They probably got another couple of minutes out on the pitch before they were back in, and like,
takes the moment away.
Like the Terenure and Cork kickers were running out for 5 minutes to try get a couple of quick shots at goal just to settle themselves in before their own match kicked off. I just thought there was no reason why you couldn't have put 20 minutes, half an hour more between those two games, give the UL Bows players another 10 minutes out in the pitch to soak it up and celebrate.
Yeah, and I actually
get
saw
some pictures together, and it also puts a little less pressure on the men's teams as well. Like, I think everyone benefits that way.
Yeah, and I saw something similar happen in the Aviva a few years ago with the soccer.
Yeah.
Same, I think Wexford Youth women were playing, and there's a few local girls from my area, and I was watching it, and then bang off, you know, team on, and it does take away from it. So yeah, that's something that hopefully would be brought in next year, because you want teams to have their moment, and you don't want it to be kind of so quick turnaround that you're kind of not getting to appreciate, even as spectators, the win for a team, and then, you know, looking at the team getting ready to go. So but it's been a good week for Irish women's rugby, and it's great to see. And I think there's some young players there, but they'll all have to improve as players, which they know themselves. But it's great because I think there's a bit of trust now between them and the RFU, and they can drive on and go, right, they're behind us, they're giving us what we need. I need to get, fitter, faster, stronger, more skillful. I need to be able to try and compete with the likes of England because we're in there I go again, XV1, and I need to be competitive in that part of the game against my opposition, and try and be the best players that they can be, and just keep going, like keep driving, like the ceiling there for them is just to keep getting better and better and better. And like the likes of Aoife Wafer, I was impressed with Katie Corrigan, the times when she scored her tries, or very little possession to make tries out of nothing and to score. Like she scored a vital try after half time. And then to hopefully more players come through, so there's more competition. We saw the likes of Kleena now, there's a bit of competition. It just drives standards. So hopefully we'll see more players coming through at that ability, and that the players now just keep driving on to be better, because we need the team to be better. If we look at the team, you're not going to predict a massive shock of any kind of game at the moment. And the Six Nations was even interesting the way you looked at all the teams. It was quite even, and played 5-1-1, played 5-1-1, played 5-1-2, So it was interesting. But look, it's success, and it's brilliant. They're back up to being third, which was kind of the norm. But now we want to push on and keep pushing, because as I said, we have a small player pool, but use that to our advantage, I think, rather than seen as we can get to know every single player in the country. You can do that. So great week for the team, and a great week for Scott Beeman. I think he's been impressive in how he's gone about doing it. I think he deserves massive credit, and his management team and everyone around it, because he talks sense. He doesn't skirt around issues. If there's problems in terms of performance, he says it. He's not going to put a positive spin when there doesn't need to be a positive spin on things. And credit to him and his team, because that was not an easy job to come into, and no. I'm not sure if there was massive amount of candidates going for it, and he's put his own stamp on it. He's got players like Kleena Maloney back in, and they've done the job, and that's massive credit to him and his players for doing that.
Yeah, so it's small steps for Ireland, but great to see the progress that's been made over the course of the year. Alison, I've kept you long enough. It's been brilliant chatting to you over these last few weeks, and here's to a long, busy summer for the Ireland women's team, training ahead of that WXV1, and we'll see how it goes in the autumn. Alison, it's been great. Thanks a million for talking to us.
No problem. Thanks very much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.